Hi, I'm Nick Hague and I'm the host of the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Today I'm with Paul and today we're going to talk about behaviour and motivational frameworks. The behaviour of buyers is fascinating. Many of the early frameworks assume that people acted in a rational way, but we now know different. It leads us into the subject of behaviour motivation. So what's our starting point?
Well, I think our starting point is economics. And when I studied economics many moons ago, we were taught that the human being is a rational person and makes decisions pretty well based on pricing. So, you know, the buyer would look at a product, see what the price is. If the price was too high, they wouldn't buy much. If the price was too low, the price was very low, they'd buy loads. So that was the thinking behind economics. And it's a huge framework. It sort of guides nearly all rational economics. However, as time's gone on, and particularly in the last 10 years, we've recognised that it's not plausible. It doesn't work like that. And there's lots of reasons for that. When we're thinking of making a purchasing decision, we haven't got uniform knowledge, perfect knowledge. We don't know what the prices are of all the products. We probably don't know what all the products are out there. So we don't work in this perfect environment that economists used to believe that we worked with. In fact, we've got biases, prejudices. We might prefer to buy something that was made in a particular country or made by a particular company. And those, or that somebody's told us about because they say it's a really good product. So those biases interfere with the rational decisions that we would expect people to make. Yeah. And when people do behave, they haven't got a lot of time. You know, we in marketing and in business tend to think that customers are thinking about our products all the time because we're thinking about our products all the time. In fact, they hardly think about our products at all. So they take a lot of shortcuts when it comes to making buying decisions. They don't spend a lot of time working out what to buy. We'll discuss how that might change if we were thinking of buying something expensive like a car. But most of the products that we buy every day, we give very little thought to. And we make shortcuts based on our biases. Now, these are called heuristics. And biases and heuristics are things that influence our behaviour. So recently, and I'm talking about the last decade, say, we have changed our belief that the buyer is a rational person and they're very much influenced, their behaviour is influenced by biases and heuristics.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we're going to get onto it or not today, but I know, you know, as you say, in the last few years, in his book, in Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, he brought this to light, didn't he, with this type of decision making and thinking within the brain, and he talked to these two modes of thought, the system 1, fast, instinctive, emotional, and system 2 being slower, more deliberative and more logical. In terms of what are the types of behaviour that we're seeking to understand, quite clearly there is buyer behaviour, but what other behaviours do we need to think about?
Yeah. So buyer behaviour is clearly important to us who are in marketing and in business. But actually people, governments, for example, health authorities want to change our behaviour. They want us to eat more fruit. They want us to take more exercise. They want us to perhaps donate organs, something like that. So people recognise that influencing behaviour is really important. And we in marketing do want to influence behaviour. And I was impressed by a case study that was set up by Volkswagen in Sweden, where, together with their advertising agency, they were launching a new car in Sweden. And as an experiment, they decided to see if they could change people's behaviour. And they wanted to see if they could make people take more exercise. And so in one of the underground stations where there were stairs, they changed the stairs into piano keys. So as people walked up the stairs and hit what the stair has now become a piano key, it played a note. And what they found was that people didn't go up the escalator, didn't want to go up the escalator. They preferred to go up the stairs and play the piano keys. So it's a good example of how, instead of saying to people, take more exercise, go up the stairs, you won't necessarily get them to do that, but give them an incentive to do it by making it fun, persuades them to do that. And I think it's a reminder that we in business have got to use psychology to try and get people to do things different.
Yeah. Yeah, and you just talked about governments there being interested in it, and I mentioned, what we talked about behavioural economics, didn't we, in System 1, System 2 thinking, but I think there's a book that I really like called Nudge, and their big idea is that, similar to, getting people to walk up the stairs rather than take the escalator, is trying to change people's behaviour to make things easy for them as well. And I thought in an article where the author of the book Nudge, Richard Thaler, he talked about how the government back in 2016 in the UK, how they could have nudged people to think differently about leaving or staying within the EU within the referendum. And it was, of course, we all now know that we left the EU in the UK, but he said, one thing that you could have done really is change the wording. And rather than using remain, he could have used join. Join is much more of a positive, a stronger word, whereas remain means passive and weak. And just this slight difference in wording can really make a difference. So it really is something that people in business, as you say, we need to think about in terms of how we use that. Help us understand how behaviour and motivation frameworks can help our businesses then.
Well, you mentioned a famous one, the one by Daniel Kahneman. He won a Nobel Prize for his thesis on System 1 and System 2 thinking. So System 1 thinking is that autonomous thinking that's automatically there in our brain. We don't need to think about it, it just happens. And the example he would give is if we met a tiger in the street, we wouldn't open a spreadsheet to say what are our options, we'd just run for it. And System 2 thinking, and then that happens within our brain. We'll get to how our brain works in a minute, but System 2 thinking is where we consider all the facts about a subject and we give it some great consideration before we actually make a decision. So some decisions are made automatically and some decisions are made slowly, fast and slow thinking. Now, it's important for us to understand that model and also understand that the brain has a left-hand side to it and a right-hand side to it. And that's what develops the slow and fast movements in Kahneman's theory. So the left-hand side of our brain is the logical side of the brain. L, left, L for logic. The right-hand side of the brain is the creative side of the brain, and they work complementary, of course, but they work completely differently. As Kahneman describes, there's fast and slow thinking. And I think an example I always consider is when we're buying a car, expensive item that we would, probably the second most expensive item we'd ever buy in our lives after the house that we live in, we may consider half a dozen different models. We'd have a price that we wanted to spend on the car, but within that price range, we'd consider a few different models. Now, the models that we'd put into the consideration set would come from System 1 thinking. You'd quickly assemble half a dozen different models of cars that you would consider, and then you'd move into System 2 thinking, where you would logically think about the economy of the car, the size of the car, the maintenance costs of it, whether it's going to meet your needs, and you have specifications of the 6 different cars. And finally, you'd come up with probably just 2 cars, which almost were the same, and you toss in a coin to decide which to buy. And then System 1 thinking comes back, and you go for the brand that emotionally you're attached to. And there's no logical reason other than the fact that you happen to have a bias, a preference, a heuristic maybe, for that particular brand. And that's how decision-making, behavioural decision-making works. And as you say, there as well as the left and right of the brain and the System 1 and System 2 thinking, there's all sorts of other frameworks that they could look at, like the tipping point, which is Malcolm Gladwell, who says that once a certain proportion of people start talking or thinking about something, a big movement takes place towards that. And then there's Nudge, the book that you were referring to there, where they suggest that bit by bit, we don't make decisions necessarily all at once, but we move towards a decision little by little. So as marketers, we ought to think about how we can persuade people to do that. And then, of course, the big one that you and I are very keen on thinking, and there's lots and lots of frameworks on this, is branding. Because branding does, it appeals to the creative side of our brain. It appeals to system one thinking, so that when we're thinking of buying a product, we automatically think of buying the brand because it's on the shelf space of our mind and it's in the front.
Yeah. And on my podcast, the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, I spoke to Wendy Smith and her alongside Marianne Lewis. They wrote a book called Both and Thinking. And this concept, this again is about, how decisions are made, but it challenges the tradition that, you've got either or thinking, and it suggests that opposing ideas or perspectives can coexist and be integrated rather than being mutually exclusive. It encourages individuals to embrace complexity, this ambiguity of that there's multiple truths that can exist simultaneously. And it's a fascinating book. I mean, it's in its simplest form, thinking about the work-life balance that we all have, rather than viewing work and personal life as competing priorities. And especially post-COVID, this both and thinking involves us integrating, flexible work arrangements, allowing employees to fulfill professional responsibilities, of course, but being able to attend their personal obligations and well-being, which is obviously important. Are there any other frameworks that we should touch on, Paul, that talk around this particular topic?
Well, there are lots on the website, so go to B2B Frameworks website, have a look at those. But do remember that what we've been talking about here is blending the rational subject of economics with psychology, and recognizing that when we're trying to persuade people to do something, because that's what we do in marketing, that we need to consider both. So have a look. There's loads of frameworks that you can look there. Choose some that might be semiotics, which might use words that persuade people to do things. There's a framework on that. So have a look at those dozens of frameworks on the website and see what suits for you.
That's great. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Nick.